Honey, I had Jacuni, you had the sock. Gonna cheese the key on cow. G'day, y'all, Kate on clock. Key all shake. Yin on tree, g'day, e clock one. Gonna cheese. It's a language that's not really used too much nowadays, but as old folks who grew up prior to going to school and whatnot, we spoke the language. And the other language that we used to talk as common language because of all the First Nations here is really a version of Southern Shoshone. In Southern Shoshone, I would say, Ayanji, Shakulu ye, Kuchinke, Ajuaji, Kuchin, Nanke, Kushea, Nanke, Yedu ye, Nanke, Nanke, Dungeon. You know, and what I'm saying is, I introduced myself as my real name is Shakuni, and Tutsa Ach is my other name. I have two names. And when I went to school, they told me my name was Mike Smith. And I thought, that doesn't sound right, you know. And the reason I didn't know is because when Indian Affairs went around registering First People, they just simply gave us names, okay? And the name they gave me was Michael the Archangel, okay? So that's what it was. And I didn't know that till I went to school. And I grew up in a small Tlingit village on the east side of Lake Lamarge. We had a trading post that we used to use when we trade prior to contact. We used to have Tlingit people would come into the interior and trade. And we would bring in Russian supplies, Russian goods, and trade with the fur. We didn't trade with Hudson Bay. We traded with fur. Basically, I don't know how we ended up in the Yukon, but basically when they had the Stewart Alaskan Purchase, it was to purchase all the trade area of the Russians. But we ended up in Canada, and 90% of us are in Alaska. There's just 10% of us that are basically in Yukon. The Tlingits basically in southeast Alaska, right down to Sitka. And past Sitka is where the hide is. And then the Tsimshian came in with Campbell, who brought the Tsimshian people from inland to an island in Alaska, just bordering South Sitka. So anyways, the Tlingit people are recent arrivals in the territory because of the trade. And there are a couple of wars that were fought back then. One was, the recent one was during the Gold Rush, 1898. There was, the Dai people, who are the Chilkoots, had basically the right to take the goods of the prospectors, the gold seekers over the mountains. So they were the ones that controlled that franchise, okay? So the Sitka people came in. The Sitka Indians came in. My grandfather on my mother's side is from Sitka. They came in and demanded part of the action. The Chilkoot said, no, absolutely not. This is our territory. You're not allowed here. Sorry, I got a cold. And we said no. So they decided to have a war. And they parlayed, okay? They parlayed. And it was finally decided, we'll have the chief of the Sitka and the chief of the Chilkoots will do a battle. The winner takes all. Basically, that was it. That was in 1898, around that period. So it was, it's not ancient history. But anyways, they had a battle. The warriors they're all fully ready for war. And Tlingits are not strangers to war because we fight with each other. So anyways, the warriors all circled and the 2 chiefs were given knives. And they battled. And in the end, the Chilkoot chief survived that battle, but he was really wounded as well. And the Sitka chief died, so the Sitkas took their chief and went home. But a few days later, the Chilkoot chief passed away as well. But that route stayed as Dai Chilkoot. That's recent history. But prior to that, remember saying that how the Tlinkits came in with trade goods. Anyways, they go throughout the Yukon. They traded in Ross River, down to Fort Selkirk, little salmon, big salmon, and really had quite a network in which they brought in goods and trade. Anyways, at Tatlin Lake, there was a Northern Shoshone village, huge village, big village. Like over 300 to 500 people lived there. There was a person there who had, through the trade, you know, they sometimes they do credit, and he started owing so much, like, you know, it's hard to really put a figure to it, but roughly around between $6,000 and $10,000. And the Tlingit trader said, "You gotta pay me." The guy says, "Well, I don't have it, but if you come back next year, I'll have it for you." So they agreed. They said, "Okay, we'll come back this year, and you better have it." "Okay, I will." So they went back to the coast, and then next year, they, you know, during the trade, they come to Tatlin Lake again, and they said, "Well, you got the money?" The guy said, "I'm sorry, I don't have it." They talked for a while, and the guy said, "Let's go and talk about it though." So they went way by themselves. They got into a heated argument, and the Northern Shoshone ended up killing the Tlingit trader. And he called his people together and says, "You know, those Tlingits are fierce. We can't allow them to go back to the coast and tell the story of how we killed this Tlingit trader." And they said, "Okay, we have to kill them all." So they did ambush and kill. And then there was a young Tlingit guy, and they said, "We can't kill him. He's too young." They said, "We can't kill you. You have, you know, but you gotta leave right away." So we left. We went back to the coast and we told the story of the massacre. Okay. Of course, you know, it's time for getting revenge. And they waited. You know, they didn't go back right away. They waited for a while, and then they came in. Just as it's starting to snow, they came in and they waited at night. And near the early morning, they attacked the village. And they slaughtered everybody except one person. They said, "You tell the story of the slaughter, because this is what happens when you kill our people." And people talk about, at the one end of the lake, there were bones piled up of all the people who lived there. And this is way back prior to contact. And this story was told to me by my uncle Louis, who got it from his dad. His dad was Atlin Tlingit. He was a Yan Yedi from Atlin. And he told the story to his son Louis. Louis is my tapa, which is uncle in the male side of the family, and then there's on the mother's side, there's another name that they use. Let me take a break here for a second. Roughly, there's a lot of stories that we do have, and basically, it was all the stories that were told to me prior to going to school. I really had a pretty good upbringing in my village, where my great uncles and my great aunts would sit me down and tell me the story of our people, and basically to make sure I understood what are the rules of survival. They didn't say these are the rules of survival. You just have to learn the rules of survival. And essentially, that's part of some of the stories. There's lots of stories. Basically, there's Crow stories. And basically, these stories are there to basically instill in you the respect for land, animals, for people, and everything. And we learn all those stories when we were very young. So what I really want to talk to you today is to really understand this land claims. I don't think anybody really truly understands the land claims. Our chiefs don't understand it. We talk about, and I got asked Kirk here to be here as he's the expert on northern governments. But I'm going to give you my version of where I think we are today and how we got here. And we started our land claims following the tabling of the white paper in 1969. Okay, Jean Chrétien and Trudeau. Trudeau was an amazing person. Trudeau wanted to bring the Constitution back to Canada. He didn't believe the BNA Act that should be a law of England that applies in Canada. Okay, because Trudeau was French. Even though they lost the war in 1760, 62, 63. They still really don't accept British rule. They don't want to be subjects of the crown. And subjects of the crown is really something that's really prevalent in First Nations government relations, because First Nations, for the most part, are not subjects of the crown. Okay? But basically, I say we're prisoners of the crown. Because when they came in and started signing treaties, basically they forced the First Nations off their land into reserves. And basically you had to stay on a reserve. And that's what it was. It's against the law to go off the reserve. And these treaties have a clause. I'm going to use the language of the 1970s when we were commonly known as Indians, and we referred to the white government as white men, white people. But don't get offended by that, because that was the vernacular of the day and it was common knowledge at that time. And anyways, Trudeau really wanted to bring back the Constitution. And he also wanted to terminate the Indian Act. He thought it was a very discriminatory act. He just wanted to get rid of it. So he asked Jean Chrétien, and they come up with white paper in '69. And they came up here, actually. Indian Affairs gathered up the people. This is our Minister of Indian Affairs that wants to talk. So that's when he presented the white paper. We want to get rid of the Indian Act. It really didn't make too much sense here because, well, we did have a few reserves. For the most part, we weren't really under the Indian Act per se. And it was, that's when people started talking about land claims. So we have a claim to this territory. Unless you sell our claim first, we're not agreeing to anything. So something happened down in BC. The Nishkas took a court case. The court case went to establish their Aboriginal title, Aboriginal rights to the land. They went through the Supreme Court, appeal court, Supreme Court of Canada, and it was 3-3 plus N1. And the case was thrown on one very technicality. It was called a fiat. To sue the Crown at that time, we had to get permission in law. That, okay, to sue, if you want to sue us, the government had to say, you have to get our permission to sue us. That was the law way back then, I'll tell you that. Because the law was basically the Crown was the law. And under constitutional monarchy, the power comes from the Crown, not from the people. And that's really, really important to understand. I didn't learn that until I went to school in the States. I went to law school in Albuquerque. And basically studied their constitutional law. But essentially, they say we're not subjects of the Crown. We're not subjects of the Crown. Okay. But anyways, because of constitutional monarchy, Trudeau, wanted to bring the Constitution back, and he basically recognized Aboriginal title. He recognized that Charter of Rights has to apply, that the governments are subject to the Charter of Rights, and that he wanted those 91 was federal powers and 92 was provincial powers. Basically, what he wanted was to have the law back in Canada and the government subject to that. Because the power comes to the crown, government, we're all powerful. The crown is all powerful, okay? So they could do anything. And Trudeau made it, put an limitation on that, the Charter of Rights. So basically, an Aboriginal title. He put Aboriginal title in there. He actually was forced to do it because the British Crown says you gotta abide by 1763, the Royal Proclamation, because without that, your title, your private title is worthless. Okay? If you accept Aboriginal title, then by the treaties that were signed, you have legitimate title to the land. Okay? That's basically what happened way back then. This is about 1980s, and that's basically. So, anyways, in the Yukon, Elijah and John Hoyt, Al Luke, and Floyd Barber actually came up with a plan, and it was to get the government to recognize the land claims as real. And Lloyd Barber was a commissioner of Indian claims, and he was a Saskatchewan, and he's a lawyer, and he came and talked with Al Luke and Elijah, and Dave, Joe, and I were witnesses to that. We were crazy as heck, but we were witnesses of that. And Dave and I went around to all the Indian bands at that time. There were 12 Indian bands, and essentially he said, we're trying to get a land claims. If you agree, say yes, and we will go to the government and say all of us agree, and we have the mandate to negotiate land claims, okay? It was getting the mandate. Elijah sent Dave and I around, and we did all the groundwork on that. I'm trying to make this fast to get to, but there's some really important detail that I have to cover. They developed it Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. Everybody basically went to a post and said, what do you need? What do you need? That's for these people in this land. And economic development was a big item for Elijah. Elijah said we have to create wealth, we have to be self-sufficient, and we need land and we need money to get off the ground, and we need to invest it and become self-sufficient. That was Elijah's big point, okay? And so they developed this Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. And then Trudeau agreed to accept it. But they had to go to Ottawa. The 12 chiefs and Elijah went to Ottawa to make the presentation to Trudeau at that historic meeting in 1973, February 14th, 1978 to Ottawa. And it was a big move, but it didn't take until 1975 till when actual negotiations started going. They say negotiations, I said it was consultation. The government sat down, the First Nations sat down, and the government basically started saying, what do you mean by land claims? He said, we have Aboriginal titles to our land, we need to still there. So basically went through that. And in 1976, government came up with an offer to get to agreement in principle. They came up with an offer of settlement. Actually, there was agreement in principle that was agreed to by Elijah and Al Luke and Ottawa, and they were going to present this to the public that we've come to an agreement in principle. But after some discussion, we said, no, it's not an agreement in principle. We don't even know what you're talking about. That was a decision that was made behind closed doors and without our knowledge. We can't go to the First Nations people. The people we talk to that want to do land claims, that's not what we agreed to. So Jeb Buchanan at the time, the minister, said, okay, let's put it forward and not present it. Essentially what it was, after to the so-called negotiations, which I call consultation. You may back me up on that, because it was really essentially consultation, see what we wanted and what we need to do to settle the land claims. So what they offered was $80 million and 1,200 square miles. 100 square miles for each of the 12 Indian bands, and these were to be reserves, okay? Reserves under the Indian Act. And we thought about it, we don't want reserves per se, and we don't want to be under the Indian Act. And that's such a small land quantum, and there's no way that it'll sustain us. So everybody was like, you can't live with that. So we went back to the table, and then this is where Elijah left, and Daniel Clem became the chair of CYFN. And Daniel, in discussions with government, John Naismith came and talked about what we need is cooperative negotiations. And to succeed, we need everybody at the table. We need Canada, we need the First Nations, and we need Yukon. This is when the Yukon was not an official party. And after some discussion, it's going to be cooperative and work together and all that. And so it was agreed, okay, Yukon will be a party to the negotiations. What the First Nations didn't know at that time, being a party to the negotiations, was that he gave them a veto, okay? You can't have an agreement if they don't agree. That was one of the big, changed everything. And the reason why negotiations lasted for 20 years, before we reached 1995 with the umbrella agreement.
Sorry, you gave the veto to the Yukon?
Yeah, they got a veto on the Yukon claims. The First Nations, I'll tell you, our interest was maintaining our Aboriginal rights under the Constitution. It was essential. And getting enough land to survive, to provide, and maintaining our harvesting rights throughout the Yukon, and protection of the land and waters and the animals in the Yukon. That was really the main selling points for our interest. Government was a little different. Yukon government was really to take over the whole land claims. And it goes back to the early 70s when Daniel Lang, now senator, formed the Northern Research Group back then. Northern Research Group was set up to oppose land claims, okay? You gotta know this. He introduced a doctrine that's followed right to this day, that we are all Yukoners, and no Yukoner has more rights than anybody else. And your Aboriginal rights, you have to give it up. Your hunting rights, you have to give it up. And you have to live by the laws of the Yukon. That's what it was, the doctrine that was introduced by the Northern Research Group back then. And this was followed by Yukon government all through the negotiations. So that we came to this day, we signed the Umbrella Final Agreement was agreed to by 4 First Nations: Champinasia, Oko, Teslin, and Mayo. Okay, those are the 4 that signed the Umbrella Final Agreement. And then we didn't realize that, but that agreement was imposed on everybody else. There was really not too much to the table. So that agreement was imposed, and people didn't go to the table, but the provisions of that agreement on land, taxation, hunting rights, and everything was set in stone. There's really not that much room to negotiate. Basically, ended up negotiating land selection. But in '84, when we go back to '84, what happened in '84? When the First Nations met on an agreement, the agreement was $232 million over 15 years, and something like 16,000 square miles of land. Okay, the basic premise. and you will retain Aboriginal title to the lands you hold, and that we will develop some sort of self-government. Don't know what it would be, but that's what is the plan. And to accept this would be one claim, one settlement for all. So basically everybody together. And it said we need 10 out of we had jumped up to 14 by that time, 14 First Nations, because there was Split Speed, Burwash, White River, Tawan, and all the that split. So we ended up with 14 First Nations. They said, we need 10 of the 14 First Nations to vote in favor for it to pass. So they went and voted. Not to Carcross. Carcross said no. Carcross First Nation said we're not accepting it. So so Harry, the chair, called a special meeting to talk about this 1984 agreement. And after discussions about 3 days, they passed a resolution at that General Assembly saying we're not giving up our Aboriginal title to the Yukon, period.
That was the Tagish meeting?
Yeah, the Tagish meeting. And as a result, government walked away. But what happened is that we had tabled all our land selections with government, and especially around Whitehorse. What happened then because the Yukon Conservative Party decided to do a land grab. They grabbed all the pieces of what they considered to be really critical land around Whitehorse. That's true, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
They grabbed all of that land. And then from 84 to 1995, the NDP government came in, and NDP did something that was like totally repulsive to us. They said, all the people who are living on land that you don't have title, come in, we'll have squatters' rights, squatters' settlement. Anybody who's living on land have a right to come in and we'll legitimize you. So all that land was given to the squatters, legitimized them. So we lost land in 84, we lost land under the squatters policy, and what was left over was what's open for selection. So we're really in a really bad way in calling that. So we wanted to go to the table right away after the first war finished, and they said no. We'll settle with the other people first. I said, why? I said, our situation is critical. We need to settle right away. They said no. And the idea behind it was to try to settle everybody and then come to Coleman Done. And after Coleman settled with Coleman Done in 1995, things changed dramatically. They brought in devolution. Okay, devolution is really critical. This is the transfer of mid powers from Canada to the Yukon. And what it is transferring programs to the Yukon to deliver to all of us. And that's where education, child welfare, all the resources were transferred to YG to administer to all Yukons. The problem with that was to provide service to Indian people, First Nations people. We had no say in how government was going to spend that money. Okay, we had absolutely no. That was cabinet decision. We were never consulted as First Nations on how those services are provided to us. They went ahead with that. What devolution did is circumvented our self-government agreements. Okay, you got these self-government agreements with jurisdiction, with this is programs you're going to supply. What happened is they gave all the program the jurisdiction area to Yukon, to most of it, and so right now today when we talk about the Yukon Forum, what we're talking about is the implementation of a self-government agreement under Yukon government. Yukon government took basically controlling all First Nations. Okay, we had to negotiate with YG, the strings to Ottawa, who are the crown. Who had the legitimate authority to deal with it. It was no longer there. They basically shifted to the Yukon transfer, Jake Yapparetto, and also the devolution agreement solidified that. Okay. So as First Nations, we're sitting back today thinking, man, this is not where we want it to be. Right now, we're no different than what we were prior to land claim settlement, and in some ways worse off. I'll tell you how we're worse off. One, we lost our hunting rights throughout the Yukon. One of them can only hunt within their traditional territory. We're not allowed to hunt outside of our territory. So we lost our hunting rights. And this was a right that was won in court. Eric Nielsen back, way back then, was defending Thomas Smith, who had shot a cow moose, and YG Game Sanction was charged by YG. And Eric took this to court and won the case and said, First Nations, you don't have a right to hunt throughout this territory for food. And YG laws are not based on food. They're based on trophy and sports hunting. Okay? And today they're based on that. There's nothing to do with food. So YG laws are basically, and then basically force us into that system, okay? That now, if I want to hunt in Mayo or whatnot, I have to basically get a hunting license or get permission from Mayo. So we lost our hunting rights. And secondly, what people really find this really hard to understand is taxation. Yeah, the Boston Tea Party should give you a clear idea what taxation is about. You can only tax your subjects. You can only tax your subjects. First Nations are not subjects, we're subjects. Not until roughly after you sign a treaty or after 1960, we're not subjects. If you're born prior to 1960, you were a status Indian, you were not a citizen of Canada, period. You know, and then not being not a citizen, all those other rights are basically not your rights. You have no right to vote, you know, basically. And so taxation. So basically, they couldn't tax us because we were not subjects of the crown. Okay. If you can understand that, it's like people don't understand. And YG argued and held their veto, saying you have to pay taxes. We need a level playing field. You can't have an economic advantage over all newcomers, so you got to be taxed. So they set up a scheme saying we'll pay taxation to our governments, okay? But the problem is, after Kwame Nkrumah signed, they introduced what is called OSR. OSR is own source revenue. And what that is that your own source revenue is deducted from what the government agreed to pay you to operate your government. Okay? In other words, Kwame Nkrumah, we're going to give you $10 million for you to provide services to our people, and that's the. However, Kwame Nkrumah gets approximately 1.9 million. Let's say 2 million for it, so you can understand it. So $2 million in taxation. What happened is that they go over and says, okay, you got $2 million, so we deduct it from the 10 million. We'll only give you 8 million. So you have 10 million to operate your government. So it was a facade that I see that basically, when you agree to pay taxes in your First Nation, you actually agree to pay to the government. This is really, people don't understand that because they don't really go into. The reason why I understand this is because I have the corporate knowledge and also have legal background, and I've done court cases based on the treaty, and it was a real eye-opener to understand what was written in the treaty. While it says you have Aboriginal title to your land, and you go 5 pages back, and there's a little clause that Aboriginal title you have to land is subject to the agreement you signed with government. Okay? So basically, you put your Aboriginal title on the shelf, and it's basically meaningless. It has no application in law. The only time it can ever have an application in law is that the treaty dies, then you have an Aboriginal title. That's basically the only assurance we have under land claims. So just fast forward to today, and I'm willing to answer any question you may have, but we're in. That's why we got involved in voting. This is where we decided that, well, we've had enough. We're going to vote for the Liberals in the federal election, and we're going to vote for the Liberals because we saw them as the best opportunity. Not Liberal, we saw them as the best opportunity to try to get change. And we're kind of concerned about that, you know, because we're taking a leap of faith here. And we're dealing with Sandy. Sandy's not a lawyer, but he listens to his lawyers. who scared the hell out of them, I guess. And said, okay, we're going to continue with the Peel case. We're going to see it to the end. And we're going to be arguing that the decision made by the appellate court in BC should be the law. Basically, what that Peel case, Ron Dale, who heard the first case, agreed with us. The governments are bound by, spirit of the agreements. They're bound by these provisions in the agreement which speak to protecting the land, environment, protection. He said, you agreed to it. The government argued, but all these planning processes are subject to the government's final authority, and we don't agree. So we want that to be understood. The Court of Appeal agreed with the Yukon government. Now it's going to the Supreme Court of Canada, and we're going to argue that the court of the first that should apply. And YG is going to argue that the court of the first instance, which is Ron Dale's decision, does not apply with the court of BC Court of Appeal. So that's going to court on March 22nd. So that's when the chiefs are going to Ottawa and to sit in and listen to the arguments at that time. And we're basically Tom Burdick is a lawyer on file, and I guess Tory Toronto are the lawyers for the government, and I guess some of there's other interveners as well, like the Gritchen of Northeasterners and Black Rainbows, the So essentially I brought you right up to date from way back when, the prehistory of Tlingits coming into the territory. I spoke to you in the language of the Tlingit people, welcoming you to our land. And I also welcomed you in Southern Shoshone, and I told you I really am Dunke. And I hope I haven't bored you to tears, because this is really, while it's really a difficult area to really understand, I try to make it as simple as possible so that you really understand the issues when you read the newspaper and whatnot, where we're at and where the government's at. That you try to understand, because as Yukoners, you're affected what's going to happen. Basically is to really get to reconciliation, that we need to somehow work together and to reconcile our differences, and that because this is really important. We think water is important. We fought right tooth and nail to the end, spend our last dollar to save the water, because we're fracking and whatnot. We want to save the water. We want to save the land, make the land as possible. It's critical to us, because the animals and food what we depend on, scavenging, berries and whatnot, are really important to us, and those are treaty rights that we have. So, as long as the sun shines, the rivers flow, and the grass grows. Let me ask you, what does that mean? ¿Cómo está, señor? I speak Spanish. Okay, what does that mean? As long as the sun shines, the rivers flow, and the grass grows. What does it mean? He's the expert. I'm always picking on him. Look at him blush.
Well, to my way, and I've heard that expression throughout much of First Nation country in Canada, because it's about looking.
It's a treaty provision, right?
It's a treaty provision. I think it was captured as well in the proclamation, or a variation of that, which is
It's those number
saying
treaties.
you keep to your word, which is you protect those interests at all costs, because that's your future. That's the only way you can maintain your future. That's my reading.
My interpretation, and don't be offended. It means you're here forever.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. To me, it means forever.
Yeah.
Forever.
To me, it also means we're all connected. We're part of it, and we're connected, and it's forever.
And we better keep it that way.
Yes.
Okay, I'll sit down now. Enjoy it. Okay, speak a
Can
little
I
loud
have-
because it's
Yeah, I know. Hi. Mike, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
Are you allowed? Are you taking questions? My question is, what is your dream or your vision of how governance in this territory can happen in a very positive way. How would you like to see us go forward together?
Really, it's trying to get our people to understand. It's trying to get the leadership to really understand. You have to remember that you go to the table, there's no one there with corporate dollars other than Chief Richard Sidney. And he's in the battle with government as well. I'll tell you, his battle is that he's trying to negotiate Tlingit law, Tlingit justice, and what the government is coming up to at the very end, he said, we'll agree to your Tlingit law and Tlingit justice if you accept the Charter of Rights. And Richard is saying, Charter of Rights wipes out Tlingit law, okay? Because under Teslin, only a man can be chief. That was a battle I fought in the 80s. And they said, and the elders all say, yeah, well, that's not been our way. And then we have our own set of customs and laws as well. If we adopt the Charter right, it would wipe out our custom. Okay? So that's the battle he had. But people don't understand that. They say, why not? Charter right means human rights. Okay? The problem is it replaces your custom, it replaces what you believe in, and it imposes a different system on you. That's why you're finding all these First Nations in court on human rights violations, okay? Which is, you know, I don't know, it's trying to get used to that really having problems, but it's that our leaders don't have corporate knowledge. They don't know the battles that have been fought, and very optimistic about the future, okay? So that's what, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that you gotta be wary of all the critical issues that are there and what you're signing. And under our Constitution, Canadian Constitution, you can sign on to your rights. Today, you can sign an agreement saying that Charter of Rights protections do not apply to me. The government can get you to do that. You know, and that's the problem with our Constitution. I really find it hard. I studied American Constitution, American law, and that's where I realized that, you know, for the treaties that are broken, because in America, they're not bound by Crown, British Crown or British law. They follow to a certain extent, but they said the Congress is supreme. If Congress so decides, you have to live with it. And that's what it is down in South. And that's why you can build that, you know, the Dakota pipeline right through the Indian reservation, because Congress is supreme. And that's what the fight is on right now. It's trying to prevent that pipeline from going through the reservation. So, you know, that's tough. But you know that.
Yeah, but I know it's really tough, but I guess what I'm asking is,
Sorry, this fan
I
is...
know it's noisy. Like, if you could have your dream come true, what, especially with respect to governance and the people's working together, what would your best situation, like your dream of how we live in this territory, hopefully this country and world, but let's isolate it to this territory first, and how we get that, what would it look like when we have that level of understanding? What's your dream situation for how we are here?
My dream is for the children. I believe our culture should continue.
Yes.
I believe our language should continue. You know, I can speak the language. Why is my kids do not speak the language? Because of the education system. The government's 56 years they've been providing education to us. We keep continually saying, you know, we need support to have our languages passed on to the younger generation. And you know, they go 20 minutes a day. I think they learn how to say the sun is shining and it was cloudy day and it's cold. And, I'm okay. That's about it for the young people. You know, they don't understand concepts. Unless you understand concepts, you know, the custom of our people, it's really hard to learn language. You know, it's hard to learn language in the classroom. You know, I learned the language in my village. I grew up in a Tlingit village, and everybody spoke. You know, no, I didn't know anybody's legal name when I was growing up. We all had names for each other, but it was in the language. You know, I was really surprised. You know, in school, like I said, I was really surprised. But I would like to see my kids speak the language, and I like to get them to understand what's important. You know, the cultural mores. You know, when I spoke in Tlingit to you this morning, I said, I welcome you to my land, and I hope you will be safe. We will look after you. And that's basically the Tlingit way, is that when you're a visitor coming to land, you're our responsibility. And nothing, no harm should come to you. And that's Tlingit law. And really, really quite critical. When I go to Alaska, they look after me. My people in Haines, in Tla'aquan, you know, this was all part of, you know, you look at that map, complex map, Kusawa is Tlingit, Tikini River is Tlingit, Ta'an, the Lake of Orange is Tlingit, and Ta'an means fish scales. You look down the lake, it's like fish scales. Kusawa is a wind, lots of wind in Kusawa, so that's how I got a name Kusawa. And those are, you know, this is the stuff that needs to be taught. And I really, honestly, you know, I really want to see our kids be happy. That's basically, that's my main goal. For the Sheesh, Shunidan, that said, thank you both in Tlingit and in Southern Dishoni. Probably speak Southern Tony right now. Her husband is one of the shining lights. He's learned the language from the elder. And the elders teaching him not only language, but our way and culture. So he's probably one of the gifts that we have. Like I go to talk to my uncle, I talk in the language. When my mom was alive, I talked to her in the language. But, you know, I'm down to my last speaker. In my community in Lake I'm down to my last speaker. And I know that there's another family from Lake but they speak Tagish more than our language and our dialect. They speak a version, but it's more Tagish than what we speak, I think. And that's the Adamson family because married someone from Tagish, and the kids all speak Tagish. But our language is, you know, I think we understand it, we understand Tagish, we understand, you know, people. Southern, Northern Shoni speak with a high tone, and we have to listen really carefully to what they're saying. We say Shoni Dan. They say Masi. They not everywhere they learn that from. That's not to do with language. That's basically French. Okay, I think that's it, folks.